The envelope was lying on my dining room table like a time bomb. I'd been staring at it for about 10 minutes, hesitating to open it. The mailman had brought it this morning, and something about the formal austerity of the white paper told me it was no good. I sighed, sipped cold coffee from a mug labeled Best Bus Driver, a 60th birthday present from my coworkers, and finally picked up the envelope. As usual, my large calloused fingers were unresponsive when it came to small jobs. "Damn it," I muttered as the edge of the paper cut my finger. A drop of blood fell onto the white envelope, leaving a small red stain. A bad sign, I thought. I'd never considered myself superstitious, but now I couldn't escape the feeling of impending disaster. The letter was from Price and Associates, a law firm in River Bend, a neighboring town to Loyalton. I knew the place. It was where my daughter Vanity had moved 15 years ago after her marriage. We'd seen each other 5 times at most since then, and each meeting ended in a new argument. "Dear Mr. River, we regret to inform you of the passing of your daughter, Vanity Gooding, in Nay River." I read that line twice, then again. The words didn't add up to a meaningful picture. Vanity was only 42. People don't die at 42 for nothing. In accordance with the provisions of the deceased's last will and testament, you are invited to attend the formal reading of the will to be held on September 18th at 11 o'clock in the morning at our office at... A will. Vanity had a will. Why would a 42-year-old woman need a will? I, who had just turned 67, didn't have one. I sank down onto the creaky kitchen chair, not noticing the crumpled letter in my hand. Vanity is dead. My only daughter is dead. The thought brought no tears or sharp pain, just a dull bewilderment, as if someone had informed him that tomorrow the sun would rise in the west. The old wall clock chimed noon, bringing me back to reality. Tomorrow. September 18th is tomorrow. I have to go. I stood up, folded the letter back into the envelope, and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I walked to the living room, a small room with a worn couch, a television, and a bookshelf where Vanity's cups from the track and a field competition stood. The last one was dated 2003, the last year we still lived as a family. I stopped in front of the shelf and picked up the framed photo, the only one I'd left in plain sight after our last fight. It showed Vanity at 16, smiling, holding her first award in a serious competition. Standing next to it was myself, then 41 years old, dark hair with no gray, putting my hand on my daughter's shoulder. We were both smiling. "Damn you, girl," I whispered to the pictures. "Why didn't you call? Why am I learning from this piece of paper?" The picture was silent. I put it back on the shelf and walked over to the window. From this side of the house, I could see the schoolyard where I'd worked for the past 20 years. First as a security guard, then, when my knee started to fail after an old injury, as a school bus driver. Not the most prestigious job, but I loved it. The kids respected me, though they were afraid of me. I couldn't stand a mess on my bus, and I could bark so loudly that even the worst bullies would be quiet. "You didn't even call me to tell me my daughter was dead," I muttered, thinking about my son-in-law, Coulter. We'd only seen each other twice, at the wedding and at the funeral of Miriam, my wife and Vanity's mother, 8 years ago. Coulter Gooding was a scraggly, lanky man with perfect hair and a smile that made my teeth chatter. An insurance agent, as I remembered, or a realtor. Something to do with sales and salesmanship. Vanity met him at a running race he was sponsoring. I immediately disliked the man when I saw the way my daughter looked at him, with an admiration I'd never seen in her eyes myself. Coulter was 8 years older than Vanity, successful, confident, all the things that I, a simple working man, couldn't boast. Our last fight with my daughter had been over Coulter. It was at Miriam's funeral. Vanity didn't come when her mother was sick. She called a couple times a week saying she was busy at work, but she showed up at the funeral in full dress with her husband at her side. I, exhausted by 2 years of caring for my fading wife, couldn't help myself. "So when your mother was dying, you were too busy, and now you found time for this show?" I threw to my daughter after the ceremony, when we were alone at the grave. "I called every week," Vanity replied, her lips pressed together the way Miriam did when she was angry. "And you wouldn't even pick up the phone. It was always Mom talking to me. Because I had nothing to say to you, I snapped at you. You left us for that prick who even went to your mother's funeral wearing cufflinks that cost as much as my monthly salary. Don't you talk about Coulter like that. He's the only one who really supports me. And you've always been like this. Always dissatisfied, always nagging. At least Mom tried to make things right between us. And now, and now you don't have to pretend to care about me, I finished and left without looking back. We haven't seen or spoken since. I knew from mutual acquaintances that Vanity had a daughter growing up. My granddaughter, whom I had never seen. I think her name was Alice or Eliza. I wasn't even sure. The phone on the wall rang, snapping me out of my bitter memories. I picked up the phone, knowing in advance who was calling. Only one person so far had used a landline to contact me. Yes, Adrina, I said in lieu of a greeting. Brantley, honey, did you remember that today it's your turn to water my azaleas? Cooed Adrina Pickett, my neighbor for the past 30 years. Adrina was a widow like me, only she'd been widowed much earlier. Her husband had died in a car accident when they were both in their early 30s. They had no children, and Adrina devoted her life to flower gardening and caring for her neighbors, especially me, who, in her opinion, was completely unable to take care of himself after the death of his wife. I forgot, I admitted honestly. I'm sorry, Audrina, but I can't tonight, or tomorrow either. I have to go away. Go away? The neighbor's voice was full of surprise. You never go anywhere. What's wrong? I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Vanity died, I said at last. I have to go to the funeral. Oh my God, Audrina breathed out. Brantley, I'm so sorry. I'll be right there. Don't, I started, but Audrina had already hung up. I sighed. I knew it was useless to argue. In 5 minutes, the neighbor would be here with a pot of chicken soup or a pie. Audrina believed that any grief could be eaten, and she was bound to start asking questions I didn't have answers for. How did Vanity die? Why didn't anyone call me right away? Where would the funeral be? What about her daughter? I didn't know any of these things. All I had was a letter from a lawyer and 18 hours until the meeting I had to get to somehow. I went upstairs to my bedroom and pulled an old suitcase out of the closet. The same one that Miriam and I had once taken on a wedding trip, a 3-day trip to a lake 2 hours from Loyalton. That was 43 years ago, but the suitcase, like myself, was made to last and still held up. I didn't know how long I'd have to stay in Riverbend, so I packed for 3 days, shirts, pants, socks, shaving gear. Then he thought about it and added his only decent suit, the one he'd buried Miriam in. The will would probably be read in a formal setting. The knock on the door was not long in coming. I went downstairs and opened it. Adrina was standing on the threshold with a large bag in her hands. Her usually neatly styled gray hair was slightly disheveled, as it was when she was in a hurry. I brought a casserole, she said instead of greeting, an apple pie, and some chicken soup. You can't cook at all, Brantley, and you need to eat before you go. She walked right past me into the kitchen like she'd done hundreds of times over the years. Adrina, I started, but my roommate was already opening my refrigerator, frowning at the sight of its nearly empty shelves. When was the last time you went to the store? She asked, pulling out a pot of soup. Are you just going to stand in the doorway? Sit down and tell me what happened to Vanity. I sighed and went into the kitchen. To argue with Adrina was like arguing with a hurricane, useless and dangerous. I don't know what happened, I said, sitting down at the table. I got a letter from some lawyer. There's a reading of the will tomorrow. There are no details. Adrina stopped with the pot in her hands and looked at me with disbelief. That's it? Her husband didn't call you? I shook my head. We haven't spoken in 8 years. You know that. Not since Miriam's funeral. Adrina pressed her lips together. She knew our family history, probably better than anyone else in Loyalton. She'd seen how Vanity had grown up, how Miriam and I had fought over her upbringing, how my daughter had drifted away from me with each passing year, how she'd run away from our little town at the first opportunity. She was stubborn like you, Adrina said, setting a bowl of soup in front of me. Eat it while it's hot. Ted and I didn't manage to have children either, but I always thought that if we had a daughter, I'd want her to be like Vanity, so driven, so, bright. I sighed. Vanity really was bright and really stubborn. Adrina was right about that. She had inherited my temper, which Miriam had never been able to rid me of in 40 years of marriage. "How are you going to go?" Adrina asked, sitting down across from me. "By bus?" I wondered. I could take the bus that went from Loyalton to River Bend twice a day, but that would mean depending on the schedule, and I had too little time to think about it. "On my own," I answered. "The old lady's still on the move." The old lady was my car, an old Ford I had brought to Loyalton when I was a young man. I used it rarely, mostly for trips to the neighboring town, for things our little store didn't carry. After Miriam died, I'd stopped traveling altogether. Work was close to home. Adrina brought everything I needed, and I'd never had any desire to travel. Adrina shook her head. "Brantley, you haven't driven in over a year. Is this wreck even going to start?" "A wreck?" I faked indignation. "This car is older than you, and it still runs. They used to make things with integrity, not like they do now." The neighbor rolled her eyes. "That's a phrase she's heard me say at least 1,000 times. "Still, I think a bus would be more reliable. Or I could drive you." "No," I was firm. "I'll drive myself. I've never liked depending on anyone, and I'm not about to start now." Adrina sighed but didn't argue. She knew me too well. "All right then, but promise me you'll be careful, and call me when you get there." She hesitated. "If you need help." "Anything." I nodded, though I wasn't going to call her. Whatever was waiting for me in River Bend, I had to handle it on my own. Adrina left an hour later, leaving my refrigerator stocked with enough food to last a week, and I was left sitting at the table, staring at my daughter's picture. Vanity was dead. My little girl, the one I taught to ride a bike, whose broken knees I bandaged, whose tears I wiped away after her first unhappy love, was dead, and I didn't even know how or why. I should have felt grief, pain, something, but inside there was only emptiness and dumb bewilderment. Maybe I'd lost the ability to feel after Miriam's death. Or perhaps it's impossible to grieve for someone you actually lost years ago. I spent the evening going through old photographs and documents that I might need to file an inheritance, though I highly doubted that Vanity had left me anything other than perhaps a list of claims. I slept poorly. I dreamed of Miriam, young as she had been when we first met. She was standing at the window of our first apartment, clutching a bundle of newborn Vanity to her chest, and she was saying something to me that I couldn't make out. I tried to move closer, but with each step she grew farther away until she disappeared into the white light. I woke up before dawn, my head heavy and feeling like I hadn't slept at all. I showered, got dressed, checked my suitcase, and went out to the yard where my car was parked. The morning air was fresh and cool. The beginning of fall in our area was always like this, with a slight hint of cold weather coming. The old Ford gleamed dimly in the dawn twilight, covered with a thin layer of dew. I ran my hand over the hood. The car was almost 40 years old, but it still looked decent. Sure, the paint had faded in places, and there were some minor dents and scratches, but overall it held up as well as I did. "So, old girl," I muttered, opening the driver's door, "can we go for a ride?" It was about a 3-hour drive to River Bend. I put my suitcase in the back seat, sat behind the wheel, and breathed in the familiar smell of old leather and machine oil. I put the key in the ignition and stood still for a moment. The unknown lay ahead, a reunion with the past I'd buried so carefully, with the man I despised, and the memory of the daughter I'd failed to protect from his influence. I was 67 years old, and I thought my life had settled into its own rut work, home, occasional get-togethers with old men like me, and the care of Adrina, from whom I could not shake off no matter how hard I tried. But the letter turned everything upside down, reminding me that I still had unfinished business, and maybe a chance to learn the truth about my daughter's life that I'd missed because of my stubbornness. I turned the key, and the engine grumbled, but after a few seconds it came to life with a familiar, steady hum. "That's good," I said, stroking the steering wheel. "We'll get through this together." As I pulled onto the road, I took one last look at my house, the little gray siding house where most of my life had been, where Vanity had been born, where Miriam had died, and for some reason I thought I might never see it again. But it was just a fleeting thought, the premonition of an old man who had seen too much of life to believe in good endings. I pushed it away and focused on the road leading to River Bend, to my past and perhaps to the answers to the questions I'd been afraid to ask for so long. I woke up an hour before dawn, though the alarm clock hadn't yet rung. Old school bus driver habits wouldn't let go. For years, I'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to be ready for my first trip by 7. For a few minutes, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to comprehend the news I'd received yesterday. My daughter is dead. Vanity was gone. Strangely, I still felt no grief. Just a kind of dull emptiness and irritation at having to break my routine, going somewhere, talking to people I'd rather never see again. I got up, showered, shaved, just as usual, only more thoroughly than in recent years. I put on a clean shirt and pants, leaving the suit for later. He went down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Loyalton was still asleep outside the window. Our town never got up early, except for the farmers on the outskirts and old men like me who couldn't sleep even if they wanted to. While the kettle was boiling, I pulled out an old shoebox I kept on the top shelf of the kitchen cupboard. The box was shabby, with a faded label that had once indicated the size of a man's shoes. 44, my size. But for 20 years, it hadn't been shoes, but photographs. Photographs I didn't want to put on display, but couldn't throw away. I sat down at the table with a mug of strong black tea and opened the box. Miriam and I's wedding photo was on top, black and white, slightly chipped around the edges. I was a skinny guy with dark hair and a cocky look. Miriam beside me, fragile, blonde, with a slightly frightened smile, as if she couldn't believe her happiness. We'd gotten married when I was 24 and she was 21. Both of us were so young and so sure that there was an eternity ahead of us. Beneath the wedding photo were pictures of Vanity, a newborn, with a red wrinkled face, a 1-year-old taking her first steps, a 5-year-old on my shoulders during the Independence Day parade. Then the school pictures. Vanity in her Loyalton High School uniform, with pigtails, with braces, with first honors for athletics. I put some of the photos aside, thinking perhaps I should take them with me. Maybe my granddaughter, whom I knew only by hearsay, would want to see what her mother had been like as a child. At the bottom of the box were the most painful pictures. Vanity's wedding. I didn't want to look at them then, and I didn't want to look at them now, but something compelled me to pull out the thin stack and look through. There's Vanity in her white dress, dazzlingly beautiful, so much like Miriam when she was young. Here she is next to Coulter, a glossy, smug man with that fake smile of his. Here's a group shot with family and friends. Me standing off to the side, with a strained smile, not fitting into this picture of perfect happiness. The last picture made me wince. It shows the three of us, me, Miriam, and Vanity, taken at the wedding. My wife is standing between us, holding both of our hands as if trying to hold us together by force. Miriam even then had that tired, haggard look that came after the first news of her illness, but she was smiling, as she always did, trying to smooth things over, to reconcile us. I put the pictures back in the box, unable to look at them anymore. Miriam had always been the peacemaker in our family. After she died, there was nothing left to keep Vanity and I from finally breaking up. The tea had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway, wrinkling my nose at the bitterness. So was my life, cold and bitter, but the only one I had left. A knock on the door made me raise my head. The clock read 6:30, too early for a routine visit, but I knew who it was. "Come in, Adrian," I shouted without getting up. The door opened, the lock clicked, and my roommate entered the kitchen, laden with bags of food and a thermos. "I knew you'd be up already," she said instead of greeting me. "I packed you a snack for the road, and a thermos of coffee, not that junk you make, but normal coffee." Adriana put the bags on the table and looked at me carefully. "Did you even sleep?" I shrugged. "The usual." "I mean 3 hours, no more." Adriana shook her head. "And in that condition, you're going to drive?" "I'm 67, not 97, I grumbled. "And I'm perfectly capable of driving." Yeah. She noticed the box of photos and her gaze softened. "Do you remember?" I nodded silently. Adriana walked over to the table and carefully pulled out one of the pictures I had set aside. "Is this when Vanity won her first serious competition?" she asked, looking at the picture. I remember the whole town was proud of her then. She was so talented. Yeah, I didn't want to talk about it, But Adrina seemed to be in the mood to talk. Brantley, she sat down across from me, still holding the picture. I know you and Vanity didn't part on the best of terms, but she was your daughter, and she's changed a lot since she got married. I looked up, suddenly interested. Changed? Did you communicate with her? Adrina nodded. Not often, but yes. We emailed sometimes. I was almost like an aunt to her while she was growing up, after all. And to be honest, I was the only connection to Loyalton she kept. Even her old friends from high school, she'd stopped talking to them. I felt a pang of irritation. So Vanity had kept in touch with Adrina, but not with me. But I could only blame myself. What did she say? I asked, trying to keep my voice indifferent. Adrina paused as if deciding how much she could tell me. She wasn't happy, Brantley. Not in the way we all thought. Everything had been going well at first. A new city, a prestigious job, a beautiful house. Coulter seemed like the perfect husband. But then, she hesitated. Then what? I stepped forward. Did he beat her? No, Audrina said quickly. It was nothing like that. But he was very controlling. At first it was little things, what clothes to wear, who to socialize with. Then he convinced her to quit her job at the school, even though she loved teaching. Said the wife of a successful man like him shouldn't work for a pittance. I clenched my fists. Typical Coulter. Everything had to fit his idea of prestige. Then he started restricting her trips here to Loyalton, Adrina continued, always finding reasons why they couldn't come for holidays or weekends. And gradually, Vanity began to write less and less, to call less and less. But you said you were in touch with her. Yes, but not in the last couple of years, Adrina sighed. After Eliza was born, things got worse. Vanity wanted you to meet her granddaughter, but Coulter always found reasons not to. He told her you didn't want to see them, that you'd given up on them. What? I almost jumped out of my chair. He was the one who wouldn't let her come. He's the one who turned her against me. I know, Adrina said calmly. But Vanity believed him. Or wanted to. It's easier than admitting she made a mistake in choosing him. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a deafening rage rising inside. All these years I'd blamed my daughter for being estranged from me, for choosing the glamorous life with Coulter over our quiet town. And it turns out he was the one who systematically destroyed our bond, isolated her, convinced her I didn't want to see them. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, trying to control my anger. Adrina looked me straight in the eye. Would you have listened? You, Brantley River, are the most stubborn person I know. You decided that Vanity betrayed you, and no amount of reasoning could change your mind. Besides, she lowered her gaze, I promised Vanity I wouldn't tell. She didn't want you to worry. She still loved you, no matter what. I felt something clench in my chest. My girl still loved me, and I was too proud, too stubborn, to take the first step toward reconciliation. And her death? I asked quietly. Do you know how it happened? Adrina shook her head. No. I only found out about it yesterday when you told me. We haven't spoken in the last 2 years. Last I heard, Vanity wanted to go back to teaching when Eliza went to school. Coulter was against it, of course. I stood up and walked over to the window. The sun had already risen, coloring the sky over Loyalton in soft pink tones. Vanity loved sunrises so much, getting up early to see the first rays of the sun, even as a teenager, when other children her age struggled to crawl out of bed for dinner. I always knew there was something wrong with that kid, I said without turning around. From the beginning, there was something about him, fake. But Vanity looked at him like the goddamn sunshine. She was young and impressionable, Adrina said softly, and he knew how to charm. You remember what he was like at their wedding? Courteous, generous, smiling at everyone. Even you almost believed he was sincere. No, I shook my head. I never believed him. And I was right. Adrina stood up and walked over to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. Brantley, there's something I have to tell you. It may seem strange, but I don't think Coulter is who he says he is. I turned around looking at her puzzled. What do you mean? Adrina clasped her hands together nervously. A couple years ago, when Vanity and I were still in touch, she'd casually mentioned that she'd found some strange papers in Coulter's office. Papers under a different name, I think. She hadn't paid much attention to it, figured it was something to do with his work. But when she'd asked him about it, He'd gotten really angry. It was the first time he'd ever yelled at her. Another name? I frowned. Do you think he's using an alias? I don't know, Adrina shook her head. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But it's always bugged me that we only know about his past from his words. He said he grew up in Portland, went to a prestigious college, worked for big companies. But he never showed pictures from his childhood, never invited friends from his past to his wedding. His parents are supposedly dead. No other relatives. That's a convenient story, I muttered. No one can check. So Romanum. Exactly, Adrina lowered her voice, though there was no one else in the house but us. And there's one more thing. In the last letter I got from Vanity, she wrote something strange, that she had begun to realize that her life was built on lies, and that she had to change things before it was too late. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she stopped responding to my emails, and a few weeks later, her social media account was deleted. I felt a chill run down my spine. What if Vanity's death wasn't accidental? What if she had learned something about her husband, something dangerous? Adrina, do you think? I don't think anything, she interrupted me quickly. I'm just telling you what I know. Maybe it's all a coincidence. Maybe Coulter really did love her and is grieving as much as you are. But be careful, Brantley. Something tells me there's more than a reading of the will waiting for you in Riverbend. I nodded, suddenly grateful for that information. Perhaps Adrina was just being dramatic. She'd always loved detective stories and could make up a conspiracy out of nothing. But my gut, which rarely failed me, told me there was some truth to what she was saying. Thanks for telling me, I said, squeezing her hand. I'll be on my guard. Adrina smiled, but there was still worry in her eyes. Will you call me when you get there? Keep me in the loop, no matter what happens. I promise, I said, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. I looked at my watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. I still had 2.5 hours before my meeting with the lawyer, and the drive to Riverbend was about 3 hours if I drove safely. I was running out of time, but I couldn't bring myself to leave early. Something was holding me back, some invisible force tethering me to home, to the familiar, to the safe. It was time to go. I walked out of the house with a small suitcase, locked the door, and headed for the garage where my old car was parked. The sun had already risen, and the day promised to be clear, though the air still held the morning chill. I opened the garage, and the dust disturbed by the creaking door danced in the sunlight. My car, an old dark blue Ford, stood there, waiting patiently like a faithful dog. I hadn't driven it in months, preferring to walk around Loyalton or take public transportation for the occasional trip to the next town. Putting my suitcase in the back seat, I got behind the wheel. The leather upholstery of the seat was slightly cracked from time, but it was still comfortable. It held my body imprint, as if it remembered all our trips together. I ran my hand over the steering wheel, wiping away the dust, and felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. In this car, Miriam and I had driven little Vanity to school, picnics to the lake, shopping trips to neighboring towns. In it, I drove Vanity to her first serious athletics competition. It was also in it that I'd come back from Miriam's funeral, alone, with the feeling that a part of me was forever in the cemetery. And now I was getting behind the wheel again, to drive to face the ghosts of the past, to find out what my daughter had left me in her will beyond the bitter residue of unfulfilled hopes and unspoken words. I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't turn it. I just sat there looking out the windshield at my yard, at the flower beds that Miriam had planted and that I'd continued to maintain after her death, though I'd never understood what flowers were for if there was no one to give them to. My gaze stopped at the swings I'd made for Vanity when she was 5. They were long dilapidated, the paint peeling, but I couldn't bring myself to tear them down, just like I couldn't get rid of her old things stored in the attic, or the medals and cups on the living room shelf. All these years I'd been living among ghosts, clinging to a past that would never return. Maybe it was time to move on. Maybe this trip was a chance to finally close this chapter of my life and start something new. Though what new could there be at 67? I took a deep breath and was about to turn the key when I heard a knock on the window. I turned around and saw Adrina standing by the car, breathing heavily as if she'd run all the way from her house. Her usually immaculately styled gray hair was disheveled, and her face had a look of worry on it. I rolled down the window. "What's wrong, Audrina? Did you forget to say goodbye?" She shook her head, still trying to catch her breath. "Don't start the engine," she blurted out. "Your daughter's husband. I saw his men outside your house last night." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "What men?" "Two men in a black sedan," Audrina said quickly. "They parked on the corner and were watching your house. I saw them when I was walking the Pearson's dog. They're not from around here, that's for sure. And as I walked by, one of them was on the phone and mentioned the name Coulter. I felt a chill run down my spine. Coincidence? Or was Coulter really following me? "Maybe you imagined it?" I asked, but without much conviction. "Why would Coulter be following me?" "I don't know." Adrina glanced around nervously, as if afraid we might be overheard. "But I checked the car before you got out. Take a look." She pointed to the ground under the car. I got out and bent down. Under the underbody, near the rear tire, I could see a small black object attached magnetically to a metal part of the body. "What is that?" I asked, even though I already had an idea. "A tracker," Adrina answered grimly. "They want to know where you're going." I carefully unhooked the device and twirled it in my hands. It was a small black box with a magnet and a flashing red light. I'd never seen such devices before, but I'd read about them in the detective novels I sometimes borrowed from the library. "How do you know about such things?" I asked suspiciously. Adrina blushed slightly. "I watch detective shows, Brantley. They use trackers like that for surveillance all the time. And by the way, if you just throw it away, they'll know you found it." It got me thinking, if Coulter was really tracking me, then he was afraid of something. Something to do with Vanity's will? Or the circumstances of her death? "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Attach it to another car," Adrina said quickly. "A bus, for example. Let them think you went in a different direction." I shook my head. "No, it's too complicated, and someone might see me attaching it to someone else's car. There's a better idea." I went into the garage and came back with a hammer. With one precise blow, I smashed the tracker, then picked up the shards off the ground and tossed them in the trash. "Now they'll know I found it," I said. "But that's even better. Let them realize that I'm not as easy as they think." Adrina looked worried. "Brantley, maybe you shouldn't go. If they're following you, something's wrong. Maybe the will. Maybe there's something in it that Coulter doesn't want you to know." I shook my head. "All the more reason for me to go. If that creep is hiding something, all the more reason I want to know what it is." I got behind the wheel again, this time with the firm intention of driving. Adrina leaned against the window. "Be careful, Brantley. And maybe you should take a different road." "Not the main highway?" I nodded. I'd already thought of that. "There's an old road through the woods that few people use. It would take me straight to River Bend, but from the other side." "Okay," Adrina squeezed my hand. "Call me when you get there. And if anything happens, I'm always in touch." I nodded gratefully. In that moment, I was glad I had a friend like Adrina. She may have liked to be dramatic, but right now her paranoia might have been justified. I started the engine and the car responded with a slight cough, but quickly came to a stop. The old lady was still on the move, despite her age. "Good luck," Audrina said, backing away from the car, "and be on the lookout." I drove out of the yard and headed not toward the main highway, but toward the old forest road that began beyond the northern edge of Loyalton. It was a longer route, but if Coulter was really following me, his men were probably waiting for me on the main road. The forest road was narrow and bumpy, the asphalt worn away in places, exposing gravel and earth. I drove slowly, watching the road carefully and glancing in the rearview mirror. There was no sign of pursuit, but I still felt anxious, as if an invisible shadow loomed over my ride. About an hour into the trip, as I was beginning to relax, a headlight flashed in the mirror. Someone was following me. On this desolate road where I hadn't encountered a single car the entire trip, it couldn't be a coincidence. I pressed the gas lightly, increasing my speed. The car behind me sped up too, shortening the distance between us. Now I could see that it was a black sedan, just like Adrina had described. My heart beat faster. I wasn't ready for a chase, especially on this old road I didn't know well. But I couldn't let them catch up with me either. What if they didn't just want to follow me, but to stop me from getting to River Bend? I stepped on the gas again, and my old car shuddered but accelerated obediently. The black sedan sped up too, the distance between us not increasing. Up ahead, the road made a sharp turn, beyond which, as I remembered, was the descent to the river. My decision was instantaneous. Instead of following the main road, I turned sharply onto a barely visible forest path to the right. Tree branches were whipping at my windshield, but I kept going, gritting my teeth and praying that I wouldn't run into any obstacles. After a few minutes of this frantic driving, I came to another road, narrow but paved. I stopped and turned off the engine, listening. No sounds of pursuit. Either they'd lost sight of me, or they'd decided not to take any chances in unfamiliar terrain. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. What was this all about? Why was Coulter so desperate to stop me from getting to River Bend? What was there in Vanity's will that he didn't want me to know? The answers to these questions were waiting for me at the lawyer's office. I started the car again and continued on my way, more cautiously now, checking often to make sure I wasn't being tailed. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I reached River Bend, navigating more by intuition than road knowledge. The town greeted me with busy streets and modern buildings. It was much larger and richer than Loyalton, with a pretension to metropolitan glitz. The office of Price and Associates was centrally located in an elegant three-story glass and stone building. I parked on a nearby street, wary of leaving my car right in front of the office, where it could easily be spotted by Coulter's men if they were still looking for me. It was still half an hour before my appointment time, but I decided not to risk it and go straight in. Better to wait in the office than on the street, where I could be seen. The entrance to the building was through glass doors that slid silently open as I approached. It was cool and quiet inside, my footsteps rumbling off the marble floor. The reception desk with a young girl behind the counter was directly across from the entrance. "Good afternoon," I said as I approached. "I'm Brantley River. I have an appointment with Mr. Price at 11. The girl looked at me with slight surprise, then checked something on the computer. "Yes, Mr. River, you're booked. Mr. Price is already waiting for you. Go up to the third floor. His office is the last one down the hall." I nodded and headed for the elevator. It was strange that the lawyer was waiting for me before the appointed time. Maybe he was afraid I might not make it either. Mr. Price's office was exactly as I had expected. Large, with expensive furniture, wood-paneled walls, and huge windows overlooking the city. The lawyer himself, however, surprised me. I expected to see an older man, prim and formal. Instead, I was greeted by a young man, barely in his 30s, wearing a rolled-up shirt and no tie. "Mr. River," he stood up from his desk and extended his hand. "I'm glad you arrived safely. I'm Ethan Price." I shook his hand, noting the firm handshake. "You were expecting me earlier," I said, not hiding my suspicion. "Why?" Price pointed to the chair across from his desk and sat down. "Frankly, I wasn't sure you'd even make it," he said bluntly. "I had reason to believe that certain individuals might try to stop you." "Certain individuals," I repeated. "You mean Coulter Gooding?" Price didn't look surprised. "So you're already aware of that?" "Yes, Mr. Gooding was very persistent in trying to find out the contents of your daughter's will before it was officially announced. When I refused, he became, shall we say, unpleasant." "Is that why you sent me the letter instead of calling me?" I asked. "Were you afraid he'd intercept the call?" Price nodded. "Your daughter warned me before she died that her husband might try to control her contacts. She said that if anything happened to her, I should contact you by letter, not by phone." I felt my throat constrict. Vanity had foreseen her death? Was she afraid of Coulter? "What happened to my daughter?" I asked quietly. "How did she die?" Price looked at me seriously. "Officially, an accident. She fell down the stairs in their house when she was alone. A severe blow to the head. Death was instantaneous. But you don't believe it was an accident," I finished for him. "I have no evidence to the contrary," Price answered cautiously. "But yes, I have my doubts, especially considering what happened the week before she died." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "Your daughter came to me 10 days ago, very agitated. She said she'd discovered something that had completely changed her view of her husband. She didn't go into details, but she insisted that the will be changed immediately." Price opened the folder and showed me the document. "This is Vanity's previous will, made 3 years ago. According to it, all of her property went to her husband, and in the event of his death, to their daughter Eliza. He turned the page. Here's the new will she signed a week before she died. She changed it completely. It goes to you now, Mr. River, on the condition that you become Eliza's guardian and manage her share of the inheritance until she comes of age. I felt the room begin to spin before my eyes. Vanity left me everything and wanted me to raise her daughter? After all these years of estrangement? I don't understand, I muttered. Why? What had she discovered about Coulter? Price shook his head. She didn't say, but she was very frightened and very insistent that her husband mustn't know about the new will. She even asked me to keep a copy in her home, not just in the office. He was silent for a moment, then added, She also left you a letter. I should give it to you after the formal reading of the will, which will take place in He looked at his watch. 15 minutes. Mr. Gooding will also be present, he insisted. I felt anger overwhelm me. Coulter would be there, the man who may have killed my daughter, who had certainly lied to her and isolated her from me all these years. Mr. River. Price leaned across the table to me, lowering his voice. I must warn you, Mr. Gooding may try to contest the will. He's already hired a lawyer. He'll argue that Vanity wasn't in her right mind when she changed the will, or that she was pressured. Pressure? I almost laughed at the bitter irony. I hadn't seen my daughter in 8 years. How could I have pressured her? I know, Price nodded, and we will defend your daughter's will by all legal means. But you need to be prepared for a difficult confrontation. He pulled another document from a drawer. Vanity also left this, a statement that she was changing her will voluntarily, in her right mind and good judgment, without any pressure. She even underwent a medical examination on the day she signed the new will to prove her capacity. She foresaw that Coulter would try to challenge her decision. As I looked at these documents, the image of my daughter in my mind changed. Not a frivolous girl enchanted by a rich man, but an intelligent, prudent woman who realized she had made a mistake and was trying to correct it. Was she trying to contact me? I asked quietly. Before she died? Price hesitated for a moment. She asked about you, wondering how you were doing. He paused. She said she was coming to see you, with Elise, after she'd sorted everything out. My throat constricted so tight I could barely speak. But she didn't have time. Price nodded, his eyes expressing genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, Mr. River. I didn't know your daughter very long, but she was special, smart, kind, strong. She loved her daughter very much and wanted the best future for her, and she believed you were the only person she could trust with Eliza. I sat there stunned by this information. Vanity trusted me. Vanity wanted to come back, and someone had taken away our chance to reconcile, to be a family again. What is it about this will that Coulter is willing to go to any lengths to keep me from finding out? I asked. The money? How rich was Vanity? It's not about the money, Price replied. It wasn't just about money. Vanity had her own account, quite substantial but not huge. It was about something else. He leaned closer, lowering his voice almost to a whisper. Among the things she left you is a safe. A small one, about the size of a book. She didn't say what was in it, but she emphasized that it was very important, and that it should only be opened in a safe place, away from Coulter. I frowned. A safe? What's safe? It's here in our vault. Price pointed toward the wall where I assumed the door to the other room was. Along with the rest of the personal effects she wanted to give you. We'll give them to you after the reading of the will. He looked at his watch, which, by the way, starts in 5 minutes. We should get to the conference room. Coulter's probably already there with his lawyer. I nodded and stood up, feeling the determination growing in me. I didn't know what was in that safe, but if Vanity had taken that risk to hand it over to me, then it was really important. And if Coulter killed my daughter because of it, I would do anything to make him answer for his crime. I'm ready, I said, squaring my shoulders. Time to meet my son-in-law. The conference room of the law firm Price and Partners was furnished with a pretension to solidity. A long, polished, dark wood table, leather armchairs, heavy framed pictures on the walls. The windows looked out onto Riverbend Central Plaza, and bright sunlight poured through them, providing a strange contrast to the gloomy reason for our meeting. When Price and I entered, three people were already in the room. An older woman in an austere suit, whom Price introduced as his partner and notary, Helen Ross. A young man with a tenacious gaze and a briefcase, clearly a lawyer, and he, Coulter Gooding. My brother-in-law sat at the far end of the table, elegant in his expensive suit, with perfectly styled hair and a self-assured smile that vanished as soon as he saw me. His face contorted with shock for a moment, then anger, but he quickly pulled himself together, pulling on a mask of polite surprise. Brantley? He stood up, as if he was going to walk over and say hello, but stayed where he was. What a surprise. We weren't expecting you. Obviously, I replied dryly. Otherwise, you wouldn't have sent your goons to follow me. Coulter cast a quick glance at his lawyer, who shook his head faintly. I don't know what you mean, my brother-in-law said with feigned bewilderment. I'm just surprised that you showed up, considering how little attention you paid to vanity in your lifetime. I felt my blood boil, but I held back. It wasn't the time to get into an argument. First, we had to find out what was in the will and get the safe that Price had mentioned. Gentlemen, Helen Ross intervened, tapping her pen on the table, I suggest we begin. We have important business to attend to the announcement of Vanity Gooding's last will and testament. I sat down opposite Coulter, looking him straight in the eye. He held my gaze, but I noticed a muscle twitch in his cheek, a sign of nervousness he couldn't hide. Price took a seat at the head of the table, pulled out a file folder, and coughed. Before we begin, let me introduce myself to those who don't know me. I'm Ethan Price, personal attorney for the late Vanity Gooding. To my right is Helen Ross, the notary who certified the will. Opposite me is Mr. Brantley River, the deceased's father. And lastly, Mr. Coulter Gooding, the widower with his attorney, Mr. Lawrence Webb. The young man next to Coulter introduced himself, representing Mr. Gooding. Price nodded and opened the folder. Now we are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Vanity Gooding, née River. This will was made and signed on September 10th of this year, 7 days before Mrs. Gooding's tragic death. It completely revokes all previous wills and decrees regarding the deceased's estate. I noticed Coulter tense up, so he knew of the new will, but not of its contents. According to this document, Price continued, Vanity Gooding, of sound mind and good judgment, disposed of her property as follows. He paused, looking directly at Coulter. All movable and immovable property, all monies, securities, and personal effects and articles of art belonging to Vanity Gooding at the time of her death shall pass to the full ownership of her father, Brantley Rivera. A silence hung in the room. Coulter sat as if thunderstruck, his face pale to the point of appearing transparent. It's impossible, he whispered at last. There must be some misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Gooding, Price replied calmly. Your wife has made her will clear. Moreover, he pulled another document from the folder. She left a written explanation of her decision, notarized. In it, she states that she is disappointed in you as a husband and father of her child, and believes that her father would be the best guardian of her inheritance. Coulter stood up abruptly, his face contorted with rage. It's a forgery. Vanity would never have written such a thing. She adored me. It's all his influence. He pointed a trembling finger at me. He'd somehow gotten to her, manipulated her. Mr. Gooding, Helen Ross said sternly, I personally attested Mrs. Gooding's signature on those documents. She was fully conscious and acting voluntarily. Moreover, she underwent a medical examination on the same day, confirming her capacity. All the documents are in order. That's impossible, Coulter repeated, but not so confidently. He looked at his lawyer, who was quickly writing something down in his notebook. Lawrence. We will, of course, contest the will, Webb said, not raising his eyes from his notes. On the grounds of the deceased's incapacity and possible pressure. Price smiled as if he had expected that. You can try, Mr. Webb, but I wouldn't advise it. Mrs. Gooding had been very prudent. Not only did she undergo a medical examination, but she recorded a video message explaining the reasons for her decision. I am prepared to provide a copy to the court if it comes to that. Coulter's face changed again. Now it reflected unconcealed fear. What could Vanity have said in that video? He He began to choke, grabbing his throat. It couldn't be. And then something happened that none of us expected. Coulter Gooding, always so confident and in control, staggered and collapsed to the floor, unconscious. For a moment, everyone froze with surprise. Then Price walked quickly over to him and checked his pulse. "He's alive, just fainted," said the lawyer. Mr. Webb, could you get some water? And perhaps some ammonia from the first aid kit in the hallway?" Coulter's lawyer nodded and walked out. I remained in my seat, watching the prostrate figure of my son-in-law with mixed feelings. Part of me was pleased with his reaction. He clearly hadn't expected Vanity to leave everything to me. But the other part was alarmed. What exactly was it about the possible video message that scared him so much? Webb returned with water and a first aid kit. Price pulled out the ammonia, opened the bottle, and held it up to Coulter's nose. The effect was immediate. His son-in-law inhaled sharply, coughed, and opened his eyes. "What? What happened?" he mumbled, trying to sit up. "You fainted, Mr. Gooding," said Price, helping him up and into a chair. "Have some water." Coulter took the glass with trembling hands and took a sip. His face was still pale, and drops of sweat were beading on his forehead. I need some time," he said in a weak voice. It was a shock. "I didn't expect Vanity to—" He stopped talking, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite pinpoint. Fear? Hatred? Calculation? "Let's continue," Helen Ross said firmly. There was another important clause in the will concerning the deceased's minor daughter, Eliza Gooding. Coulter tensed again, his eyes widening. "According to Mrs. Gooding's will," Ross continued, "the guardianship of Eliza Gooding passes to her grandfather, Brantley River. Mr. Gooding retains the right to see his daughter, but will have no right to make important decisions about her upbringing, education, or where she will live without Mr. Rivera's consent." "This is absurd!" Coulter jumped up, regaining his strength. "I am a father. No court is going to take away my parental rights in favor of an old man who's never even seen his granddaughter once in his life. Mrs. Gooding has provided very convincing evidence of your inability to be a responsible parent," Price said calmly, "including evidence of your aggressive behavior, your neglect of the child's needs, and other circumstances best not discussed publicly." Coulter slumped in his chair, his contrived confidence finally evaporating. "You can't take my daughter away from me," he said quietly, looking at me. "She's all I have left." "Where is Elise now?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "Why didn't you bring her to your mother's funeral?" Coulter looked away. "She's at my sister's. I decided a funeral was no place for a 5-year-old. "You don't have a sister," I said sharply. "You said yourself you had no relatives." Coulter's face twitched, but he pulled himself together quickly. "Half-sister. From my father's second marriage. You don't know her. I didn't believe a word of it, but I decided not to press any further. The important thing now was to finish the formalities and get what Vanity had left me. There is one more condition," Price continued, looking over the documents. "Mr. River is given full authority to dispose of all documents, photographs, records, and any other material that belong to Vanity Gooding. It is specifically agreed that the contents of the safe kept in our office are to be given exclusively to Mr. River, with no opportunity for anyone else to view them." Coulter turned pale again, his eyes racing like those of a hunted animal. "What's safe? What are you talking about? Vanity had no secrets from me." "Apparently she did," Price said calmly. "The safe was handed over to us the day before her death with clear instructions." There was silence. Coulter sat staring at one point. His lawyer was writing rapidly in his notebook, and Helen Ross was gathering documents. "Now, if there are no further questions," Price said, "I would suggest we take a recess. Mr. River, you have some papers to sign for the inheritance, and you, Mr. Gooding, need to decide if you really want to contest the will, knowing that all the evidence is not in your favor." Coulter didn't answer. He looked lost, broken. But I've known people like that. They're dangerous just when they seem defeated. "I'd like to speak to Mr. River alone," he said suddenly, raising his eyes. "Please." Price looked at me doubtfully. "I don't think that's a good idea." "It's all right," I said. "I don't mind." I wanted to hear what Coulter had to say, what he'd come up with to get out of this situation, and maybe he'd let something important slip. Price nodded reluctantly. Good, miss. Ross and I will be in my office. Mr. Webb, you can wait there too. When the door closed behind them, Coulter and I were alone, separated only by a long desk. He looked at me with an expression that was hard to decipher, a mixture of hatred, fear, and despair. You don't realize what you're getting yourself into, old man, he finally said. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Enlighten me, I replied calmly. What exactly am I supposed to understand? Coulter leaned forward, his voice quieter. Vanity had been unstable for the past few months. She started making things up, suspecting me of things I didn't do. It was all her imagination. She needed help, but she refused to accept it. And that's why you isolated her from everyone? I asked with undisguised irony. Barred her from seeing me? From her friends? Was that kind of help? I was protecting her, Coulter exclaimed. You don't know what she was like after Eliza was born. Depressed, paranoid. She could have hurt herself or the baby. I had to control the situation. And now she's dead, I said quietly. Fell down the stairs when she was alone. Very convenient. Coulter's face contorted with anger. Are you implying that I killed my wife? You're out of your mind, old man. I loved Vanity. So much so that you lied to her about me all these years? I could feel the anger rising in me. Telling her I didn't want to see them, that I'd given up on them. Coulter froze, his eyes widening. Who told you that? It doesn't matter. I know it's true. You manipulated my daughter, isolated her, controlled her every move. And when she started to suspect something, when she found something, what exactly did she find, Coulter? What was in that safe? He swallowed, his apple of his eye twitching. I don't know about any safe. Vanity didn't keep secrets from me. Then why did you freak out when Price mentioned it? I leaned forward. What's in there, Coulter? Something that might expose you? Proof that you're not who you say you are? His face petrified, the mask of self-confidence returning. You can't prove anything, man. And even if you get the safe, even if there's something in there, you think they'll believe you? Against my word? I'm a respected man in this town. I got connections, friends. Who are you? I'm nobody. An old bus driver from a backwater town. Maybe, I agreed. But I'm Vanity's father, and now, in accordance with her will, I will raise Eliza, and I'll do anything to find out the truth about my daughter's death. Coulter laughed, but there was no mirth in his laughter. Do you really think I'm going to give you Eliza? No court would give custody to a grandfather the child has never seen instead of his own father. Especially if that grandfather is a crazy old man obsessed with conspiracy theories. Vanity thought otherwise, I said calmly. And she provided proof, remember? Convincing enough for Price to be sure of success. Coulter lost his composure for a moment, his face contorted with fear. She couldn't have known anything, he muttered. I was careful, always. Apparently not enough, I said. And now I'm going to watch your every move, Coulter. And if I find that you had anything to do with my daughter's death, I'll make sure you pay for it. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly stood up. This isn't over, Brantley. You've made me your enemy. And believe me, it was a very, very bad idea. After the reading of the will and the tense conversation with Coulter, I stayed in Price's office trying to digest all the information I'd gotten. Vanity wanted to go back to Loyalton. She had learned something about her husband, something so serious that she had decided to change her will and planned to take her daughter. And then, suddenly, she was dead. I didn't believe in coincidences. I never had. In a long life, I'd learned that coincidences rarely happen by accident. Mr. River. Price came back into the room with a small wooden box in his hands. I need to give you this. Vanity had left instructions that this box was to be handed to you personally after the reading of the will. I took the box, a heavy, dark wood box with a simple, mechanical lock. Attached to it was a sealed envelope with my name written in Vanity's familiar handwriting. She said the code to the lock was in the envelope, Price explained. And there was one more thing. She insisted that you open the box only in a safe place, away from her husband. I nodded, feeling the box grow heavier in my hands. Whatever was inside, Vanity had taken a huge risk to give it to me. I need to find my granddaughter, I said, raising my eyes to Price. Coulter lied about where she is. He doesn't have a sister. Price frowned. Dash, I know. Vanity never mentioned her husband's relatives, but I'm not sure we can do anything about it right now. Legally, custody hasn't passed to you yet. You need a court order for that. If we try to find a lease without legal authority, Coulter could charge us with stalking. What if something happens to her while we're waiting for a court order? I felt a chill go down my spine at the thought. What if Coulter decides to disappear with her? I've already filed a petition for temporary guardianship based on the will and the evidence your daughter provided, Price replied. We should have an answer within 48 hours. In the meantime, maybe we should start gathering information on Coulter. The more we know, the stronger our position will be in court. I nodded in agreement. It made sense. First, we had to figure out who we were dealing with, what Coulter was hiding, and how it related to Vanity's death. Where to start? I asked. Vanity's house, Price answered without hesitation. According to the will, it's yours now. Coulter will have to vacate it within 30 days. But in the meantime, you have every right to be there and inspect your property. Perhaps you'll find some evidence there. And Coulter, can he interfere? He shouldn't, Price smiled. After today's reading of the will, he'd probably gone to his lawyer to discuss strategy. I can send my assistant with you as a witness in case Coulter is still there and tries to obstruct your inspection. An hour later, I was standing in front of my daughter's house, a large two-story colonial-style mansion surrounded by a manicured garden. The house looked as perfect as the cover of a magazine. Too perfect for my taste. It didn't have a sense of soul, of the warmth that makes a house a home. Price's assistant, a young man named Daniel, opened the door with a spare key kept in the lawyer's office. Mr. Gooding shouldn't be home, he said, looking around, but I'll stay with you just in case. I nodded and went into the house. The inside was as spotless as the outside. Expensive furniture, artwork on the walls, not a speck of dust, not a single thing out of place. But again, no sense of life. The house seemed like a showroom, not a place where a family with a young child lived. Where's Vanity's room? I asked Daniel. Upstairs, second door on the right, he answered. Dash misses. Gooding had mentioned that she had a separate bedroom for the past few years. A separate bedroom? That was unexpected. When Vanity had gotten married, she'd looked upon Coulter as a prince from a fairy tale. What had happened over the years? I climbed the wide staircase, noting in passing that it was steep and slippery. It was easy to lose my balance if I wasn't careful, especially for someone with a fear of heights, as Vanity's friend had said. Her daughter's room was unexpectedly modest compared to the rest of the house. A simple bed, a desk, and bookshelves. And most surprisingly, pictures, lots of framed pictures. Most of them were of Eliza at various ages, some of them of Vanity herself in her youth. And to my surprise, a few pictures of Miriam and me, taken before Vanity had even left Loyalton. She hadn't forgotten us. All these years, despite what Coulter had told her, she had kept those pictures. I began to methodically look around the room, opening drawers, checking bookshelves, looking under the mattress. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I felt like there must be something else Vanity wanted me to find. In the bottom drawer of the desk, under a stack of papers, I found a small leather-bound notebook. When I opened it, I immediately recognized my daughter's handwriting. Small, neat, with a distinctive slant to the left. It was a diary. I hesitated. Reading someone else's diary seemed like an invasion of privacy, even if that person was my daughter and could no longer object. But I realized it could be a clue to her death. The first entries were dated 3 months earlier and were fairly routine. Notes about the day's plans, thoughts about raising Eliza, occasional complaints about Coulter's lack of attention. But the closer to the last few pages, the more disturbing the entries became. Found some strange papers in Kay's office today. A passport in the name of Robert Hale with his picture on it. Why would he need a fake passport? When I asked him, he got madder than ever. Said I shouldn't go through his things. It was the first time I felt real fear around him. I turned the page. August 20th entry. Kay. Kay is spending more and more time with Neil. They lock themselves in the study, talking in whispers. When I walk in, they immediately shut up. Something's going on, and I'm not sure I want to know what it is. And another from September 1st. I saw Kay with a woman in a cafe on the outskirts of town. They were sitting too close together for a business meeting. When I asked him in the evening where he lied that he was at a meeting with clients. All these years I've turned a blind eye to his lies, but I can't anymore. I don't want Eliza to grow up in an atmosphere of deceit. The notes grew more and more disturbing. September 5th. Checked his computer today while Kay was at work. Found some strange financial statements. Huge sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts. Where did he get that kind of money? His business has never been this profitable. Something is wrong, and I'm afraid it's something illegal. September 8th. Decided to see a lawyer. Can't live in these lies any longer. I'm afraid for Eliza. I'm afraid for myself. Kay noticed changes in my behavior, became even more controlling. He checks my phone, asks me where I go. I'm scared. And finally, the last entry, dated September 15th, 2 days before her death, changed my will. Left everything to my father, including custody of Eliza. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I remember how caring he was when I was growing up. He would never lie to Elise, never betray her, put all the evidence of Kay's double life in the safe and gave it to Price. As soon as I get confirmation from the bank that my personal funds have been transferred to the new account, I'll pick up Eliza and leave for Loyalton. I hope my father will accept us. I closed the journal, feeling my throat constrict. Vanity was going to come back to me. She still trusted me, despite the years of separation. And for that, Coulter had killed her. Now I was sure her death wasn't an accident. Coulter had somehow learned of her plans and had decided to stop her before she could reveal his secrets. But what secrets exactly? What was this man hiding? I tucked the journal into the inside pocket of my jacket and continued my examination. In the closet behind the shoeboxes, I found another hiding place, a small box, similar to the one Price had given me, but smaller. Inside were several photos that had clearly been taken secretly Coulter with different people in different places. On the back of each photo, Vanity had written a name and a date. One name was repeated more often than the others, Neil Hartman, apparently Coulter's closest friend and business partner. I also found a flash drive neatly signed in Vanity's handwriting. Kay's financial records, copies. These findings only confirm what Vanity had written about in her diary. Coulter was leading a double life, hiding something, probably illegal, and she was starting to uncover his secrets. I went downstairs where Daniel waited patiently in the living room. "Did you find anything useful?" he asked. I showed him the journal and the flash drive. "Maybe. I need to meet with Vanity's friend, Elena Chan. Price mentioned that she was the last person to see my daughter alive." Daniel nodded. "I know where she lives. I can take you there." Elena Chan's house was the opposite of the Goodings mansion, a small, cozy house in a quiet neighborhood with a flowering garden out front. Elena herself met us on the doorstep, her face a mixture of anxiety and determination. "Mr. River," she shook my hand. "Come in, please." "I was expecting you to come." We walked into the living room, a cozy room with many books and pictures on the walls. Many of them were of Vanity smiling, alive, just as I remembered her before I met Coulter. "You were good friends," I remarked, looking at the pictures. "The best," Elena nodded, "ever since we started teaching together." Vanity was special, bright, kind, always willing to help. Even when Coulter started restricting her socialization, we found ways to see each other. "Tell me about the last time you saw her," I asked. "Price mentioned that you saw her a few days before she died." Elena nodded, her eyes filling with tears. 3 days before it happened. Vanity called me, very agitated, and asked me to meet her in a park, away from their house. When I arrived, she wasn't herself, pale, tense, looking around as if she was afraid of being followed. "What were you talking about?" I asked, feeling my heart clench. "She said she'd discovered that Coulter wasn't who he said he was," Elna said, "that he's using fake documents, that he's involved in some shady financial dealings, and that she was afraid of him, really afraid. That matched what I'd read in Vanity's diary." Did she mention that she was going to leave? I asked. Yes, Elena nodded. She said she'd changed her will, gathered all the evidence against Coulter, and planned to take Eliza and move to Loyalton with you. She wanted a fresh start, away from him. When exactly was she planning on leaving? The day she died, Elena answered quietly. She said she'd wait until Coulter went to work, pick up Eliza from daycare, and drive straight to Loyalton. She had already packed the essentials and stashed them in the trunk of her car. I felt a chill go through my insides. Vanity was so close to being saved. A few more hours and she would have been safe, with me in Loyalton. Do you think Coulter found out about her plans? I asked. Helena was silent for a moment, as if weighing whether to speak. I'm sure of it, she said finally. Vanity mentioned that he'd installed some kind of surveillance program on her phone. Maybe he read her messages or heard our conversation. And that's why he staged the accident, I finished grimly. I can't prove it, Elena said carefully. But I know Vanity. She would never have fallen down those stairs. She was very careful, especially in the last few days. And she was afraid of heights, always holding on to the railing, never going close to the edge. Did you tell that to the police? I tried, Elena sighed. But Coulter has powerful friends in the Riverbend Police Department. They didn't even bother to do a thorough investigation, just classified it as an accident. It wasn't surprising. Small towns, powerful people, familiar story, but I wasn't about to give up so easily. What do you know about Coulter's business? I asked. What does he actually do? Officially, he's an insurance broker and investment advisor, Elena answered. But Vanity suspected it was just a front. She said that the sums he handled were too large for an ordinary broker, and that he often met with people who were, let's just say, not your average client. Neil Hartman, I said, remembering the name from the diary. Who's he? Coulter's closest friend and business partner. Elena grimaced. He's not a nice guy. Vanity never liked him, said he gave off a sense of danger. She and Coulter had known each other since college, according to the official story. But Vanity suspected there was more to them than that. Where can I find this Neil guy? He has an office downtown, right next to Coulter's. They work together. Elena hesitated. But I wouldn't advise you to go there. It could be dangerous. I need to find Elise, I said firmly. Coulter had lied about where she was. What if he was planning to disappear with her? Elena went pale. I haven't seen Elise since the funeral. Coulter said he sent her to relatives, but he doesn't have any relatives as far as I know. He has a friend and his wife, I remembered Price saying. Beverly, I think. Beverly Hartman, Neil's wife, Elena nodded. They probably have Elise. They live out of town in a big house on the lake. Vanity had taken Eliza there a couple of times on weekends. It was a trail worth following. If Elise is really at the Hartmans, I had to find a way to make sure she was okay. The address? I asked. I don't know exactly. Helena shook her head. But I can show you the approximate location on a map. It's 20 minutes outside the city, in an upscale community by the lake. She opened the map on her phone and pointed to the neighborhood. It's around here. The houses there are far apart, and each has its own access to the lake. I memorized the location. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Daniel Price's assistant was looking closely at the map too. I can check the cadaster to see who owns the houses in that neighborhood, he said. It's public information. Thank you. I turned to Elena. Is there anything else that might help you find evidence against Coulter? She thought for a moment. Maybe. Vanity said she was collecting all the evidence in one place. Some of it she gave to Price. That's safe, you know about. But she also mentioned some kind of stash in their house, a place Coulter didn't know about. Unfortunately, she didn't tell me exactly where. I remembered the box Price had given me and the envelope with the code. Perhaps it not only contained the evidence against Coulter, but also an indication of this hiding place. I should check the contents of the safe, I said. There might be answers there. Be careful, Elena warned me. If Coulter is really responsible for Vanity's death, he'll stop at nothing to hide the truth. I nodded. After everything I'd learned today, I didn't doubt it for a second. One more question, I said. Do you know where my daughter is buried? I'd like to say goodbye to her. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Dash River Bend City Cemetery on the east side. She has a simple headstone, no frills, Coulter even skimped on that. I thanked Elena for her help, and Daniel and I headed out. It was getting dark outside and the day was drawing to a close. What now? Daniel asked. I need a safe place to open the safe, I answered. And then find my granddaughter. We could go back to Price's office, Daniel suggested. There's a confidential meeting room there, completely secure. I agreed, and we drove back to the lawyer's office. On the way, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd learned. Vanity had uncovered some secret of Coulter's, probably involving illegal activity. She'd gathered evidence, changed the will, and planned to run to me. And then on the day of her supposed departure, she accidentally fell down the stairs and died. Too many coincidences. Too convenient an accident. And now my granddaughter was in the hands of the man who most likely killed her mother. I had to find the evidence and save Elise before it was too late. In the confidential meeting room of Price's office, I finally opened the box Vanity had left me. The code on the sealed envelope turned out to be my date of birth, the 27th of April in the year 1958. It made me bitter to realize that even in the last days of her life, my daughter remembered such details about me, while I didn't even know exactly what my granddaughter's name was. Inside the box, I found several folders of documents, a flash drive, a small voice recorder, and a sealed envelope labeled Read First. I opened the envelope and unfolded a letter written in Vanity's familiar handwriting. Dear Dad, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer alive. I hope I am wrong in my suspicions, but every day I fear more and more for my life and for Eliza's life. I have discovered that the man I married is not who he says he is. His real name is not Coulter Gooding, but Robert Hale. He changed his identity 15 years ago after he was involved in a financial scam that cost people millions of dollars. I found his old documents and photos in a stash in his office. But that's not all. His insurance business is just a front. He's actually laundering money for an organized crime group. His friend Neil Hartman is actually his partner in this. I've compiled all the evidence I can find and I'm copying it into this box. There are financial records, photos of meetings with criminal elements, copies of documents under different names. I also recorded some of Coulter's conversations with Neil when they didn't know I was home. I changed my will to protect Elise. You're the only person I can trust with my daughter. I know we haven't spoken in years, and it's as much my fault as it is yours. I let Coulter come between us, believed his lies about you not wanting to see us. I plan to pick up Eliza and come to you on September 17th. I hope you'll accept us and we can start over. If you're reading this letter, it means I didn't get my plan to go through. Coulter must have somehow found out about my intentions. Please protect Elise. Don't let him use her the way he used me. Love, your daughter Vanity. I felt my throat constrict. My girl was going to come back to me, wanted to make things right. And Coulter no, Robert Hale had taken that chance away from us. I looked through the rest of the papers in the box. Vanity had collected an impressive amount of evidence. Copies of financial records showing suspicious transfers of large sums of money through offshore accounts. Photos of Coulter with people who, according to Vanity's signatures, were connected to the underworld. Copies of documents in Robert Hale's name, with Coulter's picture on them. But the most important piece of evidence was the audio recordings on the tape recorder. I pressed the play button and heard Coulter's voice. Need to solve the problem with Vanity. She suspects something. Saw her poking around my office yesterday. A second voice, presumably Neil Hartman's, replied, maybe we should accelerate our plan? Transfer all the assets and disappear? Can't leave Eliza behind, Coulter replied. She's my insurance policy for the future. If something goes wrong, I can always use the child to put pressure on Vanity. And if Vanity becomes a problem herself? Neil asked. A pause. Then Coulter's voice, cold and calculating. Then we'll solve that problem. Accidents happen every day. I stopped the tape, feeling the blood run cold in my veins. It was almost a confession. They were planning to kill Vanity if she became a problem. And from the looks of it, that's exactly what had happened. The rest of the tapes were similar. Conversations about suspicious financial transactions, mentions of people with criminal records, discussions of money laundering methods. Vanity had gathered enough evidence to put Coulter and his partner behind bars for years. I glanced at Price, who'd been watching me silently the whole time. This needs to go to the police, I said. The local police won't do it, Price shook his head. Coulter has too many powerful friends in River Bend. We need to go to the federal authorities, to the FBI. But even with this evidence, we don't have a direct confession to Vanity's murder. They can prosecute him for financial crimes, but not for your daughter's death. I knew he was right. We needed more. We needed a confession. What if he confessed? I asked. It's unlikely, Price replied. Coulter's too smart for that. But what if he thought he was talking to someone he could trust? Or if he thinks that he already knows the truth? Price looked at me carefully. Do you have a plan? Maybe, I said. I need a tape recorder, like the one Vanity used, and I need to set up a meeting with Coulter, alone. It could be dangerous, Price warned me. If he killed your daughter, he won't stop at killing again. I don't have a choice, I said firmly. This is about the safety of my granddaughter. I need to get proof, and fast. Price reluctantly agreed to help. He provided me with a small digital recorder disguised as a fountain pen and advised me on how best to frame the conversation to get Coulter to confess. That same night, I called Coulter. Despite the lateness of the hour, he answered after the first ring, as if he had been expecting a call. Brantley, I could hear the tension in his voice. To what do I owe the honor? We need to talk, I said, trying to make my voice sound tired and defeated. I thought about what you said. Maybe we can come to an agreement. For Elise's sake. A pause, then cautiously. What kind of agreement? I suggest we meet tomorrow and discuss it. Alone, no lawyers, just you and me. Where? He asked after a short pause. In the park by the lake, I answered. 10 o'clock in the morning. There's a gazebo on the east shore. Pretty secluded. Okay, Coulter agreed. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up the phone, feeling my heart pounding. The first step had been taken. Now I had to prepare for the most difficult conversation of my life. The morning was overcast, with low clouds and drizzling rain. The weather was a perfect match for my gloomy mood. I arrived at the park a half hour before the appointed time to look around and make sure Coulter hadn't brought reinforcements. The gazebo stood on a small rise at the water's edge, surrounded by tall trees that hid it from the park's main paths. The perfect place for a confidential conversation, or a trap. I activated the pen recorder and placed it in the breast pocket of my shirt so that the tip was peeking out. Then I sat down on the bench in the gazebo, facing the path where Coulter was supposed to come. He appeared exactly at the appointed time, alone, in an expensive coat with the collar turned up. Despite the early morning and the overcast weather, he wore dark glasses, perhaps, to hide the expression in his eyes. Brantley, he nodded, sitting down across from me. You wanted to talk about the agreement? I looked at this man and saw not a successful businessman, but the killer who'd taken my daughter's life, who'd lied and manipulated her for years. I had to hold back my anger to keep from lashing out at him right now. Yes, I forced myself to speak calmly. I've been thinking a lot about Vanity's will and what would be best for Elise. And what conclusion did you come to? There was a note of smugness in his voice. He thought I was giving up. Sharon, that a child needs both parents, I paused. Or at least one. But a real one. Coulter frowned. What do you mean? I know who you really are, Robert, I said, watching his reaction. The effect was instantaneous. Coulter froze, his face pale and his hand jerked involuntarily to the inside pocket of his cloak. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had already lost confidence. Robert Hale, convicted of financial fraud 15 years ago, I continued, disappeared on parole. Very conveniently, Coulter Gooding showed up with a new face, new credentials, but old habits. Bullshit. He tried to grin, but it was unconvincing. You have no proof. Shoo 'em. Vanity found it, I said. Your old documents, photographs, records of financial transactions. She collected it all before she died. Vanity was unstable. He reverted to his usual line of defense. She was making things up, suffering from paranoia. No, Robert, I shook my head. She was perfectly healthy and very observant. She had gathered enough evidence to put you behind bars, and she was going to get away from you by taking Eliza. She would never leave me, he hissed, losing his composure. She was mine. I made her what she became. Without me, she would have been nothing, just a school teacher in a backwater. She was my daughter, I said quietly, talented, smart, kind, and she was going to come back to me, to Loyalton, the very day she'd accidentally fallen down the stairs. Coulter looked at me with hatred. You can't prove anything. It was an accident. That's what everyone thinks. Not everyone, I objected. Elena Chan knows the truth. So do I. And so do you, Robert. Stop calling me that name, he was almost shouting. Robert Hale is dead. He's gone. But he'll be back, I said calmly. When I turn over all the evidence Vanity has collected to the FBI, they're not as corrupt as the local police. They'll dig deep, and they'll unearth not only your financial shenanigans, but my daughter's murder. You're bluffing, Coulter said, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. You have no evidence of murder. Vanity recorded your conversations with Neil, I said, including the one where you discussed what to do if she became a problem, and how accidents happen every day. Coulter turned even paler. It was just a conversation. We didn't mean... Come on, Robert, I interrupted. We both know what happened. Vanity discovered your secrets. She gathered evidence. She changed the will. And she was going to run off with Elise. You couldn't let that happen. She betrayed me, he suddenly shouted, pounding his fist on the table. After everything I'd done for her, I gave her everything. A house, status, money. And she went through my things, spying on me. Because she sensed something was wrong, I said. Because you lied to her from the beginning. She wasn't supposed to find those documents, Coulter continued, no longer in control of himself. I've always been careful. Always. But she got suspicious after Eliza was born. She started asking questions, following me. And when she found the truth, you decided to kill her, I finished. I didn't mean to, he exclaimed. I loved her in my own way, but she was going to ruin everything, the whole business, the whole life I'd built. Anna, so you pushed her down the stairs. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Coulter was silent for a moment, staring past me out at the lake. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost detached. It was so simple. She was always afraid of heights, always holding on to the railing. I was just waiting upstairs for her to come up with the laundry. One push and it was over. No sign of struggle, no witnesses. A perfect accident. I felt nausea coming up my throat. He talked about my daughter's murder so casually, so coldly. And then you found out about the will, I said, trying to stay calm. Yes, he grinned bitterly. That was a surprise. She'd thought of everything. Even in death, she'd found a way to destroy me. She wanted to protect Eliza, I said. From you. Elise is my daughter. Coulter was angry again. She belongs to me. She's a person, not property, I argued. And legally, she's in my custody now. No court will give you custody. He tried to regain his self-assurance. I'm her father. I have rights. Murderers don't have rights to their victims' children, I said calmly, especially when there's a taped confession. I pulled a pen recorder out of my pocket and showed it to him. Coulter's eyes widened in horror. You recorded our conversation? From start to finish, I nodded, including your confession to killing Vanity. I don't think even the local police would be able to ignore that evidence. Coulter jumped up, his face contorted with rage. Give me that tape, old man. Now! Or what? I asked calmly. You gonna kill me like you killed my daughter? Right here in the park? In broad daylight? I don't think you're that stupid, Robert. He froze, looking around as if he'd just realized where he was. What do you want? He asked at last. Money? I can pay. A lot. I want justice for my daughter, I answered, and safety for my granddaughter. Where's Elise? She's safe, Coulter answered evasively, and she'll stay there until I decide what to do next. At the Hartmans, I suggested. His eyes widened again. Where did you... It doesn't matter, I interrupted. What matters is that now I know where to find my granddaughter, and the police will know too. I stood up, ready to leave. Coulter grabbed my arm. Wait. We can make a deal. I can disappear. Leave the country. You'll never see me again. Just give me that tape. It's too late, I released my hand. My lawyer already has a copy. If anything happens to me, it will automatically go to the police and the FBI. It was a lie. Price didn't have the copy yet, but Coulter couldn't know that. I could see the emotions reflected on his face. Anger, fear, despair. Then it was like he deflated. His shoulders slumped. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said quietly. "The people I work for, they're not the type to forgive failure. If I go on trial, if I start talking, they'll find a way to silence me. Forever. You should have thought about that before you killed my daughter," I replied coldly. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Coulter standing in the gazebo in the drizzle. Price was waiting for me in his car in the parking lot. I sat down next to him and held out the tape recorder. "We have a confession," I said, "a full and unequivocal one." Price nodded, taking the device. "I'll contact the FBI right away. I have an agent I know in the nearest office. He'll get on the case without delay." "What about Elise?" I asked. "The Hartmans have her. We have to get her. Now that we have a record of the confession, we can get a temporary custody order today," Price replied, "and the police will be obligated to help us get the child." Events moved quickly. Within 3 hours, FBI agents arrested Coulter right in his office, charging him with murder, financial fraud, and using forged documents. Neil Hartman was arrested at the same time. Another hour later, I, along with Price, a police officer, and a social worker, pulled up to the Hartmans' lake house. Beverly Hartman, pale and frightened by the news of her husband's arrest, made no trouble and immediately called for Eliza. When I first saw my granddaughter, it took my breath away. She looked so much like Vanity at her age. The same big brown eyes, the same brown hair, even the same wrinkle between her eyebrows as she eyed strangers warily. "Eliza," I dropped to one knee to be at her eye level. "I'm your grandfather, Brantley." "Mom, did Mommy tell you about me?" The girl nodded uncertainly. "She showed me pictures. You and Grandma lived in a small town where everyone knows each other." I felt tears coming to my throat. So Vanity had told her daughter about us, despite Coulter's efforts to break the connection. "Yes, in Loyalton," I smiled, trying to hide my excitement. "It's beautiful there. You'll love it." "Will I live with you?" Elise asked. "What about Dad?" I exchanged glances with the social worker, who nodded. "Tell the truth, but be careful. Your dad did something bad," I said softly. "He's going to have to go away for a while, and you're going to live with me. That's what your mom wanted." "Mommy's not coming back?" Tears came into the girl's eyes. "Aunt Beverly said she's gone to heaven." "Yes, honey." I could hardly hold back my own tears. "Mommy went to heaven, but she loved you very much and wanted you to be happy." Elise nodded seriously, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged me. I froze for a moment, stunned by this simple, childlike gesture of trust, then gently hugged her back. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, not knowing whether I was trying to convince her or myself. That night, Elise and I stayed at the Riverbend Hotel. Price had helped us file all the necessary paperwork for temporary custody until the court made a final decision. But given the circumstances and Coulter's recorded confession, there was no doubt about the outcome of the case. When Eliza fell asleep, I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the nighttime city. I thought about Vanity, about how she'd fought to the last to protect her daughter, about how she planned to return to Loyalton, to start over, about how we could mend our relationship, become a family again. But now it was too late. My daughter was dead, murdered by the man she trusted with her life, and I was left with a granddaughter I barely knew, and a responsibility I wasn't ready for. I felt no satisfaction that Coulter had been arrested and would stand trial. No sense of relief or closure. Only bitterness at the realization of how much time we had lost with Vanity because of Coulter's pride, stubbornness, and manipulation. How many moments we could have shared but never will. The only ray of light in this darkness was Eliza, an innocent child who didn't deserve all this horror. I swore to myself that I would do everything I could to protect her, to give her the love and stability that every child deserves. I couldn't give her her mother back, but I could give her a safe home and love. And maybe in time, the stories about Vanity, the photos, the memories will help keep her image alive for my daughter. Maybe through Eliza, a part of Vanity would live on. It was a weak substitute for real reconciliation, but it was all I had left. The bitter truth was that some things can't be undone. Some mistakes can't be atoned for. Some words can't be taken back. All I could do now was move forward with Eliza, trying to be a better grandfather than I was a father, and hope that somewhere, somehow, Vanity knows that the truth has prevailed, that her daughter is safe, and that I will do everything I can to fulfill her last will.